Racist officer threatened to make her disappear. Didn't know she runs the FBI. The intersection of power and prejudice creates the most dangerous form of injustice. When authority figures believe they can act with impunity, they rarely consider who might be watching from the shadows. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. Alina Davis stepped through the revolving doors of the Philadelphia FBI office, her eyes scanning the bustling lobby with calculated precision. Though she wore simple clothing, a navy blazer over a white blouse and dark slacks, there was an unmistakable dignity in her posture that most people missed. The director had deliberately chosen to arrive unannounced, without the usual security detail that would have announced her status. Today's mission was different. She needed to see the unfiltered reality of the agency she had been appointed to lead just 3 months ago. The morning light filtered through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor as Alina approached the security checkpoint. She had received anonymous reports about discriminatory practices in this branch, and rather than delegate the investigation, she decided to experience it firsthand. Officer Brian Thompson looked up from his station, his gaze immediately assessing and dismissing her. His eyes narrowed slightly as she approached, a subtle shift in his demeanor that wouldn't be noticeable to most. But Alina had spent 25 years reading people's micro-expressions. "ID and purpose of visit," Thompson demanded, his tone noticeably harsher than he had used with the white businessman who had passed through moments earlier. Alina reached into her handbag and produced her identification. "I have an appointment," she stated simply, maintaining a neutral expression. The security officer barely glanced at her credentials before setting them aside. He gestured impatiently for her to place her bag on the conveyor belt. "Arms out, feet apart," he instructed, his voice carrying an edge that hadn't been present for previous visitors. As she complied, Thompson began rifling through her belongings with unnecessary thoroughness. He removed her notebook, flipping through its pages, then examined her smartphone with exaggerated scrutiny. The search extended well beyond standard protocol, becoming increasingly invasive as he emptied the contents of her wallet onto the counter. "Is there a problem?" Alina asked calmly. "Just doing my job," he replied curtly, his eyes never meeting hers. "We can't be too careful these days." Behind them, a white woman approached the checkpoint. Thompson immediately brightened, waving her through with minimal inspection while keeping Alina waiting. The contrast was stark and deliberate, exactly what she had come to witness. Alina absorbed every detail, mentally documenting each interaction. The director's expression remained impassive, but her mind was already formulating the changes that would soon sweep through this building like a cleansing storm. Brian Thompson glanced at Alina Davis's FBI identification badge with open disdain. His eyes barely registered the federal seal or the credentials that granted her access to every secure facility in the country. The security officer's lips curled into a dismissive sneer as he pushed the badge back across the counter. "Nice try," he said coldly, his voice dripping with contempt. "I've seen better fakes. You'll need to step aside for additional screening." Without waiting for her response, Thompson carelessly shoved Alina's belongings to the corner of the security desk. The contrast in his behavior became painfully obvious when he immediately turned to the next visitor, a well-dressed white man in a business suit, and waved him through with a friendly nod. "Morning, sir. Go right ahead," Thompson said, his tone suddenly warm and professional. Alina felt the familiar sting of humiliation burning in her chest. But years of navigating spaces where she was unwelcome had taught her to maintain composure. Her face remained a careful mask of neutrality as she observed the officer's behavior with the analytical precision that had earned her the directorship. She noted how Thompson's posture relaxed when addressing certain visitors, while tensing when others approached. His voice shifted octaves, deeper and more authoritative with people who looked like her, lighter and more deferential with others. The FBI director catalogued every microaggression with methodical attention, storing each detail for later. The metal detector seemed to operate on a similar bias. Alina watched as 3 consecutive white visitors passed through without incident. But when a young black man in a professional suit approached, the device suddenly blared its alarm. Thompson made a show of thoroughly wanding the embarrassed visitor despite the obvious absence of metal objects. "Can't be too careful these days," he muttered loudly enough for everyone to hear. Alina remained still, her trained eyes taking in the systematic pattern unfolding before her. She noticed the subtle glances exchanged between Thompson and another security guard, unspoken communications that determined who deserved scrutiny and who deserved courtesy. The Philadelphia office lobby buzzed with morning activity, but to Alina, the scene moved in slow motion. Every interaction at the checkpoint told a story of institutional bias so ingrained that it had become invisible to most, but not to her. She mentally documented the timestamps, the names on visitor badges, the pattern of random selections that seemed anything but random. Thompson returned his attention to her, clearly expecting her to protest or create a scene. Instead, she met his gaze with quiet dignity, her silence more powerful than any objection could be. He had no idea that his actions were being witnessed by the very person with the authority to dismantle his entire world. Taylor Reed stood at the far end of the Philadelphia FBI office lobby, sorting through case files when movement near the entrance caught his eye. The junior agent's attention was immediately drawn to the woman being hassled at the security checkpoint. It took only a moment for recognition to hit him like a thunderbolt: Alina Davis, the director of the FBI herself. Taylor's heart rate spiked as he watched Officer Thompson's disgraceful behavior unfold. The security officer was treating Director Davis with blatant disrespect, his prejudice on full display as he rifled through her belongings with unnecessary aggression. What made the situation even more alarming was that Thompson clearly had no idea who he was mistreating. "This can't be happening," Taylor whispered to himself. Glancing around to see if anyone else recognized the severity of the situation, most employees hurried past, either oblivious or unwilling to get involved. The junior agent felt a cold sweat break out across his forehead as he weighed his options. His career at the Bureau was still in its infancy. Taylor had worked tirelessly to secure his position, overcoming numerous obstacles along the way. Interfering could jeopardize everything he'd built. Yet watching the scene unfold, seeing the composed dignity with which Director Davis handled Thompson's aggression, stirred something profound within him. Taylor hesitated, his hand hovering over the smartphone in his pocket. The agency's internal policies strictly prohibited unauthorized recordings inside the building. Violation of this rule could result in immediate termination, but the injustice playing out before him demanded documentation. With a deep breath, Taylor made his decision. He casually positioned himself against a pillar, angling his body to appear as though he was checking messages. In reality, he was carefully framing Thompson and Director Davis in the device's camera view. He tapped the record button, capturing the security officer's increasingly hostile behavior. If this is happening to the director herself, Taylor thought, what's happening to ordinary citizens? Every instinct for self-preservation screamed at him to stop, to delete the evidence, to walk away. His hands trembled slightly as he continued recording, knowing he was crossing a line that could end his promising career. Yet something stronger than fear, a fundamental sense of right and wrong, kept his finger from hitting the stop button. As Thompson's voice grew louder, more confrontational, Taylor captured every word. Every microaggression, every abuse of power. The young agent knew he might pay dearly for his actions, but in that moment, doing the right thing mattered more than personal consequences. Brian Thompson grew increasingly confident as the standoff continued in the Philadelphia FBI office lobby. His shoulders squared with unearned authority as he raised his voice, deliberately creating a spectacle for everyone to witness. "Ma'am, you're actively resisting standard security protocol," he announced loudly, making sure his voice carried across the marble-floored entrance hall. "I need you to sign this visitor disclaimer immediately." He thrust a document toward Alina Davis, his finger jabbing at a signature line at the bottom. The form contained cleverly worded language that would effectively acknowledge she had been uncooperative and potentially threatening during the security screening. "I will not be signing that," Alina replied, her voice calm but firm. The director maintained perfect composure, standing straight with her hands clasped before her. "That document misrepresents our interaction completely." The security officer's face flushed red. "Then you won't be proceeding any further into this building." He stepped closer, lowering his voice to a threatening whisper. "You people always think rules don't apply to you." Across the lobby, Taylor Reed pretended to check his phone while actually recording the entire exchange. The junior agent's fingers trembled slightly as he captured Thompson's increasingly aggressive behavior, knowing this evidence could prove crucial later. "I understand protocol perfectly well," Alina responded, her gaze unwavering. "But what I don't understand is why I'm being singled out when 3 visitors before me weren't asked to sign anything similar." Thompson's jaw tightened as he glanced around, suddenly aware of the growing audience. Several employees had slowed their pace, watching the confrontation with uncomfortable expressions. He hadn't counted on having witnesses. "This is standard procedure for anyone who triggers additional screening," he insisted, though his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. "Is it?" Alina asked simply. The overhead security camera silently captured every moment from multiple angles, its presence completely forgotten by the increasingly frustrated officer. The surveillance system recorded Thompson shifting his weight nervously, realizing his usual intimidation tactics weren't working. "Look," he said, dropping his voice again, "we can make this easy or difficult. Your choice." Alina remained perfectly still, her expression neutral but resolute. "I choose neither. I choose correct." Thompson's frustration boiled over. He grabbed his radio, preparing to call for backup, completely unaware that his every word and action were being documented not only by the building's security system, but also by Taylor's device across the room. The evidence was mounting with each passing second, creating a digital record of discrimination that would soon prove impossible to deny. Brian Thompson leaned in close, his breath hot against Alina Davis's face. His voice dropped to a menacing whisper that only she could hear. "People like you can disappear in places like this," he hissed, eyes narrowing with unmistakable malice. "No one would even notice you were gone." The security officer's words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. What he failed to realize in his moment of intimidation was the small red light blinking steadily above them. The security camera captured every syllable, every threatening gesture, its unblinking eye a silent witness to his abuse of power. Alina maintained her composure, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her rattled. Years of navigating hostile environments had taught her to wear calm like armor. She met his gaze without flinching, her silence more powerful than any retort. "Nothing to say?" Thompson smirked, interpreting her restraint as fear. "That's what I thought." As he turned away, satisfied with his intimidation, the director slipped her hand into her pocket. With practiced discretion, she unlocked her smartphone and tapped a specific pattern on the screen. The seemingly innocuous gesture activated an emergency protocol developed for situations exactly like this one. The coded message traveled through secure channels, bypassing standard communications networks. Within seconds, the alert reached FBI headquarters in Washington. Surveillance specialists immediately rerouted security feeds from the Philadelphia office to their monitoring stations, establishing a direct visual and audio link to the unfolding situation. "We have eyes on the director," confirmed a technician in the Washington command center, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she enhanced the image quality. "Audio coming through now." The team watched in stunned silence as Thompson continued his harassment, unaware that his career was unraveling with every word. Senior officials gathered around the monitors, their expressions hardening as they witnessed the blatant discrimination against their leader. Back in Philadelphia, Alina felt a subtle vibration against her hip, confirmation that her team was now watching. A sense of calm washed over her. This was no longer just her battle. The entire system was now engaged. Thompson circled back, emboldened by what he perceived as victory. "I'll need you to step into the security office for additional questioning," he said, his hand moving toward his radio. Alina nodded almost imperceptibly, knowing that every moment of this interaction was being recorded, analyzed, and preserved as evidence. The surveillance team in Washington leaned forward in their chairs, tension building as they watched their director willingly walk deeper into the lion's den. What Thompson saw as submission was, in fact, a tactical decision. The FBI director was gathering evidence, building a case that would soon bring his entire corrupt operation crashing down around him. Down the hall, Marcus Reynolds shifted uncomfortably at his post, his eyes fixed on the security monitor. The rookie officer had only been with the Philadelphia FBI office for 3 months, but he'd already witnessed enough of Brian Thompson's behavior to recognize a pattern. This time, however, something felt different, more dangerous, more deliberate. Marcus watched as Thompson leaned in close to the woman, his body language unmistakably threatening. The way he positioned himself, blocking her path, reminded Marcus of a predator cornering prey. Though the security camera captured no audio, Thompson's expression told the whole story. "Not again," Marcus whispered to himself, tugging nervously at his uniform collar. He'd seen Thompson single out visitors before, always those with darker skin, always with that same contemptuous look, but the intensity of this confrontation made his stomach churn. The rookie's mind raced through his options. He could report what he was seeing, but Thompson had friends in high places at FedGuard, the private security contractor that employed them both. 3 weeks ago, another officer had filed a complaint about Thompson's conduct and suddenly found himself reassigned to overnight shifts at a warehouse across town. Marcus glanced at his phone, considering whether to document what was happening. His probationary period wouldn't end for another 2 months. One wrong move, and he'd lose the job he'd worked so hard to secure, the job that paid his mother's medical bills. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he watched the woman maintain her composure despite Thompson's intimidation. There was something remarkable about her steadiness, a quiet dignity that made his own inaction feel increasingly shameful. Marcus thought about his younger sister, how she'd looked up to him when he announced he'd gotten this position. "You'll protect people," she'd said with admiration. Now he wondered what protection really meant if he remained silent in moments like this. The anxiety gnawed at his insides like a physical presence. If he spoke up, Thompson and his allies could destroy his career before it even began. But if he said nothing, he would become part of the very system he'd once hoped to improve. Marcus took a deep breath and straightened his shoulders. He couldn't unsee what was happening on that monitor. The choice before him wasn't really a choice at all. It was a test of character, and deep down, he already knew what he had to do. Marcus Reynolds tugged at Brian Thompson's sleeve, pulling him just out of earshot from the security checkpoint. His hands trembled visibly as he leaned in, voice barely above a whisper. "This isn't right, Brian," he said, swallowing hard. "You're crossing a line with her." Thompson's face hardened into a mask of contempt. "Mind your own business, rookie. You've been here, what, 3 months? I've been running security in this building for 7 years. The junior officer's eyes darted nervously toward Alina Davis, who stood with remarkable composure despite the humiliation she'd endured. There was something about her dignity that stirred something in Reynolds, a courage he hadn't known he possessed. "She hasn't done anything wrong," Marcus insisted, his voice gaining the slightest edge of confidence. "You're singling her out because of her race, and we both know it." Thompson scoffed, adjusting his uniform with an exaggerated motion. "You want to throw away your career for some random woman? Be my guest." He jabbed a finger into Reynolds' chest. "But remember who writes your performance reviews." The threat hung in the air between them. Marcus felt the weight of his mortgage payments, his student loans, the financial responsibility to his aging mother in Pittsburgh. Everything he'd worked for could vanish with one bad report from Thompson. Yet as he glanced again at Alina, something shifted inside him. The rookie security officer straightened his shoulders, remembering why he'd taken this job in the first place, not just for a paycheck, but because he believed in justice. "I'm filing a report," Marcus said, his voice steadier now. "What you're doing violates at least 3 sections of our conduct code." Thompson's eyes narrowed dangerously. "You'll regret this," he hissed, but Reynolds was already walking away, heading towards Samuel Wilson's office. His heart pounded as he knocked on the security chief's door. With each passing second, Marcus questioned his decision. Was he overreacting? Would Wilson even care? The Philadelphia office had its unwritten rules, and Thompson seemed untouchable within the building's hierarchy. But as Reynolds began filling out the incident form, describing Thompson's behavior in precise, factual language, he felt a strange sense of relief washing over him. His hands no longer shook. Whatever happened next, he could live with himself. What Marcus couldn't know was that his simple act of courage had ignited something, a small spark of resistance that would soon spread throughout the team. Challenging years of silent complicity. In that moment, Reynolds wasn't just filing paperwork, he was becoming part of something much larger than himself. Brian Thompson gripped his radio tightly, his knuckles whitening as he pressed the transmit button. "This is Thompson at main checkpoint. We have an uncooperative visitor making threats. Possible security breach." His voice carried just enough urgency to warrant attention, but not enough to suggest he couldn't handle the situation. Across from him, Alina Davis maintained her composure, her eyes never leaving his face as he fabricated the report. She recognized the tactic immediately, creating an official record that would later justify whatever action he chose to take against her. "I need backup and documentation of aggressive behavior," Thompson continued, glancing sideways at a colleague who shifted uncomfortably but remained silent. "Our subject is refusing to comply with standard procedures and has made verbal threats." The lobby had grown quieter, other visitors and staff sensing the mounting tension. Some pretended not to notice while others watched with undisguised curiosity. A security camera in the corner swiveled slightly, its red light blinking as it captured every moment of the unfolding scene. Unknown to the officer, his radio transmission had triggered more than just the response he expected. 3 floors above, Samuel Wilson was reviewing security protocols when an automated alert flashed across his monitor. The system had flagged unusual activity at the checkpoint, multiple detainments exceeding standard processing times. all involving visitors of specific demographics. The security chief frowned, pulling up the live feed from the lobby. What he saw made him immediately stand and reach for his access card. Wilson had implemented the monitoring system 6 months ago after noticing disturbing patterns in visitor processing, but this was the first time it had captured such blatant misconduct in real time. "Tell Thompson I'm on my way down," he instructed his assistant, already striding toward the elevator, "and get me the visitor logs from the past 2 hours." Back at the checkpoint, Thompson was building his case, each word carefully chosen to paint Alina as the aggressor. "I've asked her repeatedly to comply with security protocols," he reported, unaware that the system was automatically comparing his claims with the actual footage. The tension in the lobby was palpable now, like electricity before a storm. Several employees had slowed their pace, lingering longer than necessary. Taylor Reed, watching from behind a column, continued recording discreetly on his device, his finger hovering over the send button. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime that somehow cut through the tension like a knife. Samuel Wilson stepped out, his expression unreadable but his purpose clear. Every eye in the lobby followed him as he approached the checkpoint, each step bringing consequences that would reverberate far beyond this moment. Samuel Wilson strode into the lobby, his footsteps echoing against the marble floor. The security chief's presence immediately commanded attention, causing conversations to halt mid-sentence. Standing 6 feet tall with military posture, Wilson had spent 15 years building a reputation for fairness and professionalism that preceded him wherever he went. "Officer Thompson, a word," he called out, his voice calm but carrying unmistakable authority. Brian Thompson's shoulders tensed visibly as he turned to face his superior. The security officer's previous confidence wavered, replaced by a thin veneer of professional courtesy. "Sir, I was just following protocol with this visitor," Thompson explained, gesturing dismissively toward Alina Davis, who stood observing the interaction with calculated patience. Wilson's gaze hardened. "I've received reports of a disturbance. Care to explain exactly what protocol you're following?" Thompson glanced around nervously before stepping closer to his boss. "Look, Sam," he whispered, his voice barely audible to others in the lobby. "We've known each other a long time. FedGuard has always taken care of its own. One call to Jackson, and this whole thing disappears." The veiled threat hung in the air between them. Thompson's implication was clear. His connections with the private security contractor could shield him from consequences. Wilson's expression remained impassive, but his eyes narrowed slightly. "Is that so?" he asked, maintaining direct eye contact with his subordinate. The security chief took a deliberate step back. "I want access to the surveillance footage. Now, the system's been glitchy today," Thompson countered quickly. "Maintenance issues." "Interesting," Wilson replied, "because I just spoke with IT and they reported no outages." He pulled out his phone and tapped the screen several times. "In fact, I'm accessing the live feed right now." Thompson's face paled slightly as Wilson continued, "And I want all footage from the past hour, every angle, every camera in this section, and I want it before you leave this spot." The officer's confidence crumbled further as Wilson added, "And Officer Thompson, if there's even a hint that those recordings have been tampered with, I'll personally ensure that your relationship with FedGuard becomes the focus of an internal investigation." Around them, the lobby had grown unnaturally quiet. Junior agents and visitors alike pretended not to watch the confrontation unfolding before them, while Alina Davis observed with the calculated patience of someone who had seen this scenario play out before. Wilson's eyes never left Thompson's face as the officer reluctantly moved toward the security station to retrieve the footage, knowing that whatever protection he thought he had was rapidly disintegrating under his superior's unwavering stare. Samuel Wilson sat motionless in the dimly lit security office, his eyes fixed on the monitor displaying the checkpoint footage. With each passing frame, his expression hardened into stone. The security chief's jaw clenched as he watched Brian Thompson's treatment of Alina Davis unfold in high definition. "Play it again," he instructed the technician, leaning forward to catch every detail. This wasn't Thompson's first offense. It was simply the first time he'd been caught targeting someone with actual power. Wilson had suspected problems with the checkpoint procedures for months. Complaints had trickled in, but they'd been systematically buried or dismissed as misunderstandings. Now the evidence was undeniable. Thompson's discriminatory behavior wasn't just a momentary lapse in judgment. It was clearly part of an established pattern with deep, troubling roots. "And pull up the visitor logs from the past 3 months, Wilson ordered, his voice steady despite his growing anger, "and get me the security roster schedules." As the data appeared on screen, Wilson began cross-referencing incidents. A disturbing pattern emerged. Thompson had been strategically assigned to high-traffic periods, particularly when community outreach events brought more diverse visitors to the building. But there was something else. Wilson noticed financial discrepancies in the contractor payment records. FedGuard, the private security company that employed Thompson, had been making irregular payments to several officers, including substantial bonuses to Thompson himself. "These payments don't align with any approved compensation structure," Wilson muttered, scrolling through the digital records. The security chief pulled up Thompson's personnel file, noting his rapid promotions despite mediocre performance reviews. The web of corruption was becoming clearer. FedGuard executives had been cultivating relationships with certain officers, creating a shadow system of loyalty that operated outside official channels. Thompson wasn't just a prejudiced officer, he was a protected asset in a larger scheme. Wilson picked up his phone and made a call to the FBI's Internal Affairs Division. "I need a full audit of all FedGuard contracts and personnel assignments for the past 18 months, he said, "and lock down all financial records immediately." In the lobby below, Thompson continued his shift, unaware that his world was about to collapse. The officer chatted casually with colleagues, occasionally glancing toward Alina with undisguised contempt. Wilson closed the file on his desk and stood up. What had begun as an investigation into one man's prejudice had uncovered something far more insidious, a systematic corruption that had infected the very institution sworn to uphold justice. The security chief straightened his tie, preparing to confront not just an individual, but an entire broken system. Alina had endured enough. The charade had served its purpose, revealing the rot that festered beneath the surface of the institution she was tasked with leading. With deliberate movements, she straightened her posture and stepped forward into the center of the lobby. The commotion around her gradually subsided as people sensed a shift in the atmosphere. "My name is Alina Davis," she announced, her voice carrying across the room without needing to shout. "I am the director of the FBI." The words hung in the air for a moment before their impact registered. The bustling lobby fell into a stunned silence. Several agents froze mid-stride. Documents clutched in their hands. A coffee cup slipped from someone's grasp, shattering against the floor, but nobody moved to clean it up. Brian Thompson's reaction was the most dramatic. The color drained from his face so rapidly it was as if someone had pulled a plug. His mouth opened and closed without producing sound, like a fish suddenly finding itself on dry land. The security officer who had been so confident, so dismissive just moments ago, now looked physically ill as the realization crashed over him. He had been threatening, harassing, and attempting to intimidate the highest-ranking official in the entire Federal Bureau of Investigation. That's impossible," he finally stammered, his voice barely audible. "You can't be—" "Check the identification you so carelessly dismissed," Alina replied, her tone measured but firm. She nodded toward the badge he had tossed aside earlier. Samuel Wilson stepped forward, retrieving the identification and examining it properly. His eyes widened as he confirmed what Alina had stated. The security chief looked up, meeting her gaze with newfound respect and undisguised alarm. "Director Davis," he acknowledged formally, inclining his head slightly. "I apologize for this situation." Taylor Reed, watching from nearby, couldn't suppress a small smile of vindication. The junior agent had recognized the gravity of what was unfolding from the beginning, and now everyone else was catching up. Thompson began to tremble visibly, his earlier bravado evaporating like morning mist. "I was just following protocol," he attempted weakly, but the excuse sounded hollow even to his own ears. "We'll discuss your interpretation of protocol in detail," Alina responded, her calm demeanor somehow more intimidating than any display of anger could have been. "Every word, every action you've taken today has been documented." The implications of her statement rippled through the room. Thompson's career, his future, his reputation, all now hung in the balance, subject to the judgment of the woman he had threatened to make disappear. Marcus Reynolds watched from the periphery, his earlier anxiety giving way to a sense of witnessing something historic. This moment would change everything. Suddenly, every eye in the building was on Alina Davis. The lobby fell into a profound silence, the kind that follows a thunderclap. Security personnel froze mid-motion. Administrative staff who had been passing through stopped in their tracks. Even the constant hum of office chatter evaporated into nothing. The director stood tall, her posture reflecting years of commanding respect in rooms filled with skeptics. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. When she spoke, her words carried the weight of federal authority, yet maintained the measured calm of someone who had faced prejudice her entire career. "I came here today without announcement or fanfare for a reason," Alina explained, addressing everyone gathered in the lobby. "What I've witnessed confirms what anonymous reports have suggested for months, that discriminatory practices have become normalized within our own walls." Brian Thompson's face had turned ashen. The security officer who had been so confident minutes earlier now looked like he might collapse. His eyes darted around, searching for allies, finding none. Samuel Wilson stood beside him, his expression stern and uncompromising. "This agency was founded on principles of justice and equality," the director continued. "Yet I've just experienced firsthand how those principles can be betrayed by the very people sworn to uphold them." Taylor Reed stepped forward, smartphone still in hand. The junior agent offered the device to his superior, evidence of his quiet resistance now becoming part of something much larger. Alina acknowledged him with a nod that communicated both gratitude and approval. By afternoon, news vans lined the street outside the Philadelphia office. Reporters clustered at the entrance, their cameras capturing a story that would dominate headlines for weeks. Inside, Alina had established a temporary command center, interviewing staff members who suddenly found courage to share similar experiences. "It's been happening for years," confessed one administrative assistant, tears streaming down her face. "But nobody believed us." The story spread like wildfire across social media platforms. Within hours, it transformed from a local incident into a national scandal. Political commentators debated the implications on prime-time television. Civil rights organizations issued statements of support for the director's actions. Marcus Reynolds sat in a small conference room, recounting his observations to internal investigators. The rookie's hands still trembled, but his voice remained steady as he described the pattern of behavior he'd witnessed since joining the security team. What had begun as one woman's undercover investigation had exposed the dark underbelly of systemic prejudice within one of America's most powerful institutions. And at the center of it all stood Alina Davis, no longer underestimated, no longer threatened, but now the catalyst for a reckoning long overdue. The Philadelphia FBI office had become ground zero for a national reckoning. News vans lined the streets outside as Alina Davis assembled a specialized task force of the Bureau's most trusted investigators. She moved with quiet purpose, her composed demeanor belying the storm she had unleashed. "I want everything," she instructed the team. "Every contract, every hiring decision, every training manual. Nothing is off-limits." The investigation revealed troubling patterns almost immediately. FedGuard's training materials contained coded language that encouraged officers to profile visitors based on appearance. One document, labeled Threat Assessment Protocol, explicitly ranked potential security risks using criteria that clearly targeted minority groups. Agent Taylor Reed, now working directly under Alina's supervision, discovered financial irregularities that pointed to deeper corruption. "They've been overcharging for services by 23%, he reported, sliding a folder across the conference table. "And there's a pattern of kickbacks to certain officials who approved their contract renewals." The young agent had found his calling in this investigation, his earlier act of courage transforming into dedicated purpose. The evidence he uncovered showed FedGuard had maintained its lucrative government contracts through a sophisticated network of payoffs and favors. In Washington, Alina worked late into the night, reviewing the mounting evidence. Her phone buzzed constantly with updates from field offices across the country reporting similar issues with security contractors. What had begun as one woman's humiliation was exposing a nationwide problem. The director's unwavering resolve inspired others. A female security analyst from the Boston office came forward with years of documented harassment. A black intelligence specialist shared emails showing he'd been repeatedly passed over for promotion despite superior qualifications. The floodgates had opened. "We've created an anonymous reporting system," Samuel Wilson explained during a staff meeting. The security chief had become a key ally in the reform efforts. In just 3 days, we've received over 200 testimonials. Marcus Reynolds found himself unexpectedly at the center of attention. The rookie officer's decision to speak up against Thompson had made him something of a reluctant hero. "I just did what anyone should have done," he told a group of new security trainees, his previous anxiety replaced with quiet confidence. Meanwhile, investigators discovered FedGuard's training centers across 5 states, all used materials with similar discriminatory undertones. The company's entire operational philosophy seemed built around reinforcing biases rather than ensuring genuine security. As the evidence mounted, Alina prepared for the next phase. This wasn't just about one officer or one company. It was about dismantling a system that had failed too many for too long. The quiet determination in her eyes told everyone around her that this was just the beginning. The public outcry was immediate and deafening. Within 48 hours of the incident, the Philadelphia FBI office found itself at the center of a national conversation about institutional racism. Alina Davis stood firm amidst the storm, leveraging the momentum to implement sweeping reforms that many had deemed impossible just days earlier. "This isn't just about one officer or one incident," she told reporters gathered outside the Washington headquarters. "This is about dismantling systems that have allowed discrimination to flourish unchecked." The director authorized an unprecedented overhaul of security protocols. Every checkpoint in federal buildings nationwide would now be monitored by dual camera systems, one facing the officer, one facing the visitor, with footage automatically archived and randomly audited by an independent oversight committee. No longer would encounters like hers exist only in the memories of those who experience them. Samuel Wilson was appointed to lead a specialized task force dedicated to vetting security contractors. The relationship with FedGuard was immediately suspended pending investigation, sending shockwaves through the private security industry. "We're examining every contract, every training manual, every hiring practice," Wilson explained during the first committee meeting. "The standards we establish today will become the benchmark for federal agencies across the country." Mandatory anti-bias training was instituted for all employees, regardless of rank or tenure. The curriculum, developed by civil rights experts and former agents who had experienced discrimination firsthand, left no room for the just following protocol defense that Thompson had hidden behind. The FBI's public statement, drafted by Alina herself, acknowledged past failures without equivocation. "We cannot claim to uphold justice while allowing injustice within our walls. Today marks the beginning of a new chapter in our commitment to equal treatment under the law." As the reforms took shape, Alina became more than just an administrator. She became a symbol. Junior agents like Taylor Reed looked to her with newfound admiration. Citizens who had long distrusted the Bureau saw a glimmer of hope in her leadership. "She could have used her position to avoid that situation entirely," one commentator noted. "Instead, she walked through those doors knowing exactly what might happen, and she used it to force change." The director received thousands of letters from people sharing similar experiences in government buildings, airports, and public spaces. She read each one, understanding that her personal humiliation had created space for countless others to be heard. The path forward wasn't easy. There was resistance from old guard officials who viewed the reforms as an overreaction, but Alina's composure never wavered. She had stared down Thompson's threats with dignity, and she approached institutional resistance with the same unwavering resolve. Brian Thompson paced his small apartment, frantically making calls to former colleagues and friends who had once promised to have his back. One by one, they declined to answer or made excuses to end the conversation quickly. His desperation grew with each passing hour. "This is a witch hunt," he told the Philadelphia Inquirer reporter who had reluctantly agreed to hear his side. "Director Davis has a political agenda. She's using me as a scapegoat to push her diversity initiatives." His voice cracked as he attempted to paint himself as the victim of a calculated setup. Thompson created a social media account under a pseudonym, sharing carefully edited clips of the incident that omitted his most damning actions. He reached out to conservative commentators, claiming the FBI was being weaponized against ordinary Americans who were just doing their jobs. But his efforts crumbled under the weight of overwhelming evidence. Taylor Reed's smartphone footage captured Thompson's threatening whisper with crystal clarity. "People like you can disappear in places like this." The young agent had risked everything to document the abuse of power, his steady hand preserving the moment that would ultimately seal the security officer's fate. Marcus Reynolds' detailed report corroborated every element of Alina's account, describing a pattern of discriminatory behavior he had witnessed over months. The rookie's testimony was particularly damaging because it came from within Thompson's own ranks, a colleague with nothing to gain and everything to lose by speaking out. Most devastating were the security tapes. When played in sequence, they revealed Thompson's systematic harassment of visitors of color while waving white visitors through with barely a glance at their credentials. The timestamp data showed this wasn't an isolated incident, but a consistent pattern spanning years. "Audrey, what we're seeing isn't just one man's prejudice," Alina stated during a press conference at FBI headquarters. "It's the result of a culture that allowed such behavior to go unchecked for far too long." Independent investigators discovered Thompson had been the subject of 17 previous complaints, all buried by supervisors or dismissed without proper review. Former FedGuard employees came forward with stories of implicit bias in training materials and hiring practices that favored candidates who would feed and maintain order through intimidation. Thompson watched his reputation disintegrate on national television. The security officer, who had wielded his badge like a weapon, now found himself powerless against the truth. His last-ditch effort to salvage his career had only exposed the deeper rot within the system, a system that Director Davis was now dismantling piece by piece. The FedGuard executives sat uncomfortably in the federal hearing room, shifting in their seats as investigators presented damning evidence of their company's practices. What had begun as an isolated incident with Brian Thompson had ballooned into a full-scale investigation of the security contractor's operations nationwide. Documents revealed a pattern of discriminatory hiring, training that reinforced racial profiling, and financial kickbacks that kept the corrupt system in place. "These practices didn't develop overnight," said the lead investigator, sliding another folder across the polished table. "They were cultivated and protected." As media coverage intensified, more FedGuard employees stepped forward with their own stories. A former trainer revealed how security officers were subtly encouraged to apply different standards based on appearance. A payroll clerk produced records showing suspicious bonuses to officers who maintained special protocols at government buildings. By the end of the week, 3 high-ranking officials had tendered their resignations. The company's stock plummeted as government agencies across the country began reviewing their contracts with the security firm. At FBI headquarters in Washington, Alina Davis worked tirelessly, personally overseeing the development of new security protocols. She assembled a diverse task force of agents, security experts, and civil rights attorneys to create a framework that would prevent similar abuses of power. What happened in Philadelphia wasn't just about one officer or one company, she explained during a closed-door meeting with regional directors. It was about a system that allowed prejudice to masquerade as procedure. The director instituted mandatory body cameras for all security personnel and established an independent review board with the authority to investigate complaints. She implemented a blind application process for security contracts, removing identifying information that might trigger bias. "Accountability isn't optional," Alina told her team, her voice firm as she reviewed the final draft of the new guidelines. "It's the foundation everything else must be built upon." Samuel Wilson, now promoted to oversee security reforms across multiple offices, nodded in agreement. He had witnessed firsthand how quickly corruption could spread when left unchecked. The Philadelphia office became ground zero for these changes, with every procedure scrutinized and rebuilt from the ground up. Taylor Reid, whose courage had helped expose the truth, was invited to join the reform committee, bringing his perspective as someone who had risked everything to do what was right. For the first time in decades, the agency's internal culture began to shift. Employees who had once stayed silent now knew their voices would be heard. The message was clear: no one was above scrutiny, and justice would no longer be selectively applied. With each passing day, more employees stepped forward, emboldened by Alina Davis's unwavering commitment to justice. The Philadelphia office transformed into a safe space where years of bottled-up experiences finally found voice. In a repurposed conference room that Alina designated for testimonials, the walls seemed to absorb decades of institutional pain. "I was passed over for promotion 6 times, confessed a veteran analyst, tears streaming down her face. Each time, someone less qualified got the position. The director listened intently, her notepad filling with patterns of discrimination that had gone unchallenged for years. She never rushed these sessions, understanding that each story represented not just an individual wound, but a systemic failure. One afternoon, Marcus Reynolds approached her with trembling hands. The rookie security officer had compiled a list of 23 incidents he'd witnessed during his short tenure. "I should have spoken up sooner," he admitted. "And you spoke up when it mattered most," Alina reassured him, her voice gentle yet resolute. The testimonials revealed a disturbing pattern extending far beyond Thompson's behavior. FedGuard's influence had created an environment where complaints disappeared into administrative black holes. Several employees described how Samuel Wilson had tried to address issues in the past, only to be stonewalled by higher-ups with connections to the contractor. Taylor Reed organized digital archives of all testimonies, ensuring nothing would be lost or forgotten. The junior agent worked tirelessly, often staying late into the evening to properly document each account. "This isn't just about one bad officer," Alina explained during a staff meeting. "It's about dismantling structures that protect people like him." By the third week, she launched the Pathways to Leadership Mentorship program, specifically designed for underrepresented staff members. The initiative paired promising employees with senior mentors from diverse backgrounds, creating clear advancement tracks previously obscured by unofficial barriers. "Everyone deserves to see themselves reflected in leadership," she stated firmly during the program's launch. When questioned about the rapid pace of changes, Alina remained steadfast. "Discrimination doesn't take breaks. So neither can we." The program quickly gained traction, with 47 employees enrolling in its first phase. For many, it represented the first time they felt truly seen within the institution they served. Wilson volunteered as one of the first mentors, his experience and commitment to reform making him an invaluable ally. Together with Alina, he helped craft new protocols ensuring that merit, not connections or prejudice, would determine advancement. As the Philadelphia office transformed, it became clear that what had begun as one woman's undercover investigation was evolving into something much more profound, a blueprint for institutional change that would eventually reshape the entire bureau. Brian Thompson sat alone in his modest apartment, staring at the suspension notice that had arrived by courier that morning. The television droned in the background, his own face occasionally flashing across the screen as news outlets continued their coverage of what they now called the FBI checkpoint scandal. 3 weeks had passed since his confrontation with Alina Davis, but the fallout showed no signs of subsiding. His phone, once constantly buzzing with messages from colleagues and friends within the security community, now remained silent for days at a time. The few texts he received were from former associates distancing themselves, making it clear they wanted nothing to do with him anymore. "I need to lay low for a while," one message read. "You understand?" He understood perfectly. The protective shield of relationships he'd cultivated over 15 years in security had disintegrated almost overnight. Former FedGuard executives who once invited him to backyard barbecues now pretended not to recognize him at the corner store. Even his union representative had suggested he consider other options rather than fight the suspension. The investigation had expanded far beyond Philadelphia. Federal auditors were combing through security contracts at government buildings nationwide, with particular focus on FedGuard's operations. Thompson's name appeared in dozens of internal documents, each one another nail in the coffin of his career. His bank account dwindled as legal fees mounted. The attorney he'd hired, the only professional still willing to take his calls, had been brutally honest about his prospects. "They have video evidence, multiple witness statements, and a documented pattern of behavior," she had explained during their last meeting. "And when the person you threatened turns out to be the director of the FBI..." She had left the sentence unfinished, her expression saying everything words couldn't. The officer stared at his reflection in the dark television screen when the news segment ended. He barely recognized himself, the confident swagger replaced by slumped shoulders, dark circles under bloodshot eyes. A notification pinged on his laptop. Another article mentioning him by name had been published. The headline stung, "Checkpoint Bias: How Brian Thompson Became the Face of Institutional Racism." He closed the computer and walked to the window. Across the street, he noticed a car he didn't recognize. Probably nothing, but paranoia had become his constant companion. The investigation team had interviewed him 4 times already, each session more grueling than the last. Thompson pulled the blinds shut. His name would forever be linked to this scandal, a cautionary tale taught in security training programs for years to come. The protection he had relied on was gone, and the future stretched before him, uncertain and unforgiving. In a ceremony that surprised even the most seasoned agents, Samuel Wilson stood tall as he received the FBI Director's Award for Excellence in Leadership. The security chief's unwavering commitment to justice had turned what could have been a buried incident into a watershed moment for the agency. Beside him stood Marcus Reynolds, the rookie officer whose conscience had ultimately outweighed his fear, now recognized with the Integrity Award rarely bestowed upon someone of his rank. Sometimes doing what's right means standing alone," Samuel said during his acceptance speech, his voice steady but humble. "But you're never truly alone when you stand for justice." The Philadelphia office buzzed with a renewed sense of purpose. Where tension once hung thick in the air, there was now an atmosphere of cautious optimism. Agents who had previously kept their heads down now spoke freely in meetings, offering perspectives that would have been silenced just months before. Taylor Reed's promotion to supervisory special agent came with a new responsibility, overseeing the implementation of anti-bias protocols throughout the Northeast region. His desk, once tucked away in a corner, now occupied a glass-walled office where transparency was both literal and symbolic. The junior agent who had risked everything to secretly record Thompson's abuse had become the face of institutional courage. "I just did what anyone should have done," Taylor told the Philadelphia Inquirer, uncomfortable with his newfound hero status. The real change happens when doing the right thing becomes ordinary, not extraordinary. The ripple effects extended beyond personnel changes. Visitor processing procedures were completely overhauled. The security checkpoint, once a site of humiliation for many, now operated under constant oversight with multiple accountability measures. Every interaction was recorded, reviewed, and rated for professionalism. FedGuard's contract was terminated, replaced by a security firm with stringent ethical requirements and diverse leadership. The new contractors underwent extensive training that emphasized equal treatment regardless of race, religion, or background. Weekly town halls became standard practice, where anyone from janitors to senior agents could voice concerns without fear of retaliation. What had begun as Alina Davis's undercover operation had transformed into a model that other FBI offices across the country were now studying and implementing. In the break room that had once been segregated by invisible but powerful social boundaries, agents of all backgrounds now shared coffee and conversation. The Philadelphia office, once infamous within the Bureau for its resistance to change, had become the unexpected standard-bearer for what the FBI could and should be, a place where justice began at the front door. Alina Davis stood at the window of her Washington office, gazing at the city skyline as evening descended. 3 months had passed since the Philadelphia incident, yet the ripples continued to spread through the entire agency. She traced her reflection in the glass, remembering the look on Thompson's face when he realized who she truly was. That moment had changed everything. Behind her, a stack of reports documented the sweeping reforms now reshaping the FBI. 37 employees had come forward with similar experiences. 12 senior officials had resigned. The FedGuard contract had been terminated, with the company now facing federal investigation for discriminatory practices and financial improprieties. "Director, your 4 o'clock is here," her assistant announced through the intercom. Alina turned from the window, straightening her jacket. "Send them in." Taylor Reed entered, carrying a folder of implementation reports. The junior agent had been instrumental in documenting Thompson's behavior, and his promotion to the newly formed Accountability Division recognized that courage. "The Philadelphia office numbers are promising," Taylor said, opening the folder. "Complaint resolution is up 83%. And we've seen a 40% increase in applications from minority candidates." Alina nodded, satisfaction warming her expression. "And Reynolds? Marcus is thriving as our community liaison. The training program he developed has been approved for national rollout." She thought of the rookie security officer who had found his voice that day. His willingness to stand against Thompson had inspired others throughout the ranks. The phone on her desk chimed softly. Samuel Wilson was calling from Philadelphia with his weekly update. The security chief had become one of her most trusted allies in rebuilding the culture from within. "There's still resistance," Alina acknowledged, moving to her desk. "Change never comes easily to institutions this old." "But it comes," Taylor replied. "Thompson's termination hearing is tomorrow. The evidence is overwhelming." Alina remembered Thompson's threat, how people like her could disappear in places like that. Now he was the one vanishing from the system he had manipulated for so long. Outside her window, the American flag fluttered against the darkening sky. Alina knew the work ahead remained substantial. Policies could be rewritten overnight, but changing hearts and minds required persistent effort. Some days the challenge seemed insurmountable. Yet something fundamental had shifted. In offices across the country, employees spoke up where they once stayed silent. People who had been marginalized now saw paths to leadership. The agency was slowly becoming what it always should have been, a place of equal justice under law. Alina Davis had walked into that Philadelphia building to witness reality. She had emerged with something more valuable, the power to transform it.